Thank you. So, as he said, my name is Josh Sokol. I'm the Information Security Program Owner at National Instruments. I'm also the chair of the OWASP Global Chapters Committee, and I'm the co-chair of OWASP AppSecUSA. So, if you guys have any questions, problems, concerns, whatever, I realize we're getting towards the end of the conference, but feel free to talk to me. And especially, any feedback. If there's things that we can do better for you next year or whatever, let us know. We're here to help you guys.
I'm Dan Cornell. I'm the founder and CTO at Denim Group, and I'm a software developer by background, and also I'm the chapter leader for OWASP San Antonio, and I serve on the global membership committee.
Passing the lavalier back and forth is weird. All right, so the way this talk kind of came about is working at National Instruments. We have a whole lot of tools, things that we buy, things like that. And at one point, we kind of came to the conclusion that we needed an IPS system, something to help kind of track vulnerabilities and issues that were coming in, whatnot. And the idea was we had a budget for it, and management said, get us the best tool that we can possibly get for our money, right? So how many of you guys have been in this kind of situation? Everybody should be raising their hands, right? So what I did is I started looking at the different ways to look at this, right? And the first thing that came to mind was you can look at third-party reviews. So I looked at SC Magazine. They had a great article back in February 2011, and it actually ranked each of about 5 or 6 different vendors, and it gave them stars. And stars are awesome, right? So if you have 5 stars, you're obviously better than somebody with 4 stars, right? So based on this list of starring and whatnot, I'm automatically able to eliminate SourceFire and CounterSnipe from my looking at these tools, right? The other thing that you can do is you can look at industry rankings. How many of you guys have ever looked at Gartner for buying a tool? Yeah. So I think pretty much all of us have been there. The Magic Quadrant is something we all know and love. And so looking at this guy, we can clearly see that in the leaders category over here, McAfee, SourceFire, and HP are my obvious choices, right? So we start looking at that. HP, Cisco, IBM, they're kind of out there, on the verge, but McAfee and SourceFire are looking really, really good right now. Now the problem with these industry rankings, is that it's Gartner, and we don't really know where those results come from. Cost. I can look at this on a cost approach, right? And that same SC Magazine article that was giving us all these stars and telling us this tool's 5 stars, this tool's 4 stars, that article also had cost for these tools. So you start looking at that, and that CounterSnipe tool that only had 4 stars, it was only $500 per site. Wow, $500 per site, that's awesome, right? Maybe I should get that, and maybe if I only pay $500, I got $49,500, and they can use that for a raise, right? We should all be so lucky. So if CounterSnipe, $500 per site. So this is another way that we can look at how we rank those tools. The last one here is features, and I think features is the thing that a lot of us are familiar with. So I can look at this and I can say, well, it's an IPS system, so it should do O-Day threat protection, right? And it should do inline protection, and I should be able to do passive monitoring if I want to. I should have support for custom policies, real-time alerting, central management, compliance grade reporting, high availability, right? These are the types of features that we want to do. Now, here's the deal. Every single one of these things, there's a problem with it. And the problem, with the third-party stuff is you always have third-party bias, right? SC Magazine, they don't know things like I know things. They don't know my environment. They know what people pay them to know, right? That's basically how it works. With Gartner, you have incomplete industry rankings. There were actually some very, very major IPS vendors that were left off of the Gartner rankings. In terms of cost is always negotiable. If you're a very small shop, you're probably going to pay more than a much, much larger shop that has that influence. Or if you go through certain purchasing channels, certain bars that you use, time in, time out, you'll probably get a higher discount level. So cost is always negotiable there. And then in terms of features, let's be honest. IPS systems at this point, features are basically a commodity, right? Every single one of those features that were on that slide, pretty much every single one of those IPS vendors has those. So we can't we can't buy our products really based on any of these, or there's at the very least an issue with every single one of those. Now the other issue here is tools are based on, they're normally evaluated based on features, not on enterprise value. So you start looking at these tools, and we have firewalls and IPS and NAC and all these different things. We look at them in silos, right? We look at our tools and we say, I want to buy a firewall, and firewalls should have these features, and you buy that firewall. And then you move on and you bought the firewall, and now you look at IPS and say, my IPS should have this feature set, and I want to buy it to do this. Now, so this is a problem. Our tools need to work together. Our tools need to talk to each other. They need to be able to communicate. So when we're evaluating them, we can't look at them in silos because they don't actually work in silos. The other issue is proprietary protocols. A lot of these tools have protocols where they'll only work if you buy that same vendor, things like that. Greedy platforms. So I like to think when I'm looking at log management, how many of you guys have heard of SIEM, right? Security Information Event Management. These are tools that are designed to only consume data. They only consume data. They don't give anything back, right? And then functionality. A lot of times we have these different silos, and functionality is actually duplicated across these different silos. So my firewall may have very similar functionality to my IPS system, and vice versa. So we have to gauge enterprise value, right? We have to figure out how do we separate the bad tools from the good, the stuff that's actually going to benefit my enterprise from the stuff that's not. And the way that I've done this, in looking at this this problem here, is I separate it out into different classifications of tools. And the first one is consumers. The idea behind a consumer is it's a tool that can get as much data as possible from as many sources as possible. So we have things like events, event data. We have alerts coming from other systems. We have SNMP, we have syslog. Any tool that can take in all that data and do something with it, we call that a consumer. Now, as I mentioned, consumers can be greedy. So, just like the leech here, it can take in a lot of stuff, but it never gives anything back, right? That's the definition of a parasite. So we need to be very, very careful when we're looking at these tools that are consuming, that they have the ability to give back. So now we get to providers, right? We want our tools to not only consume the data, we want it to also be able to give data back to the other systems. And when we say that, we talk about things like open APIs. Can I tap into this tool and use that API to grab data back? We talk about open databases. Maybe I have the username and password, I know the table schema, I can connect to the system and grab that data that way. Or maybe it's just a data export, right? I can hit download to CSV and then use that to import it to another system. These are capabilities that we really, really like to have in our tools. So we have consumers and we have providers. Now, if we have both consumers and providers, we have symbiosis, right? And symbiosis means that you can take your tools, you can take the best of breed tools, the things that are going to most benefit you in your environment, and we can have those tools work together because they're able to provide data and they're able to consume data from each other. It also means that within your enterprise, even a smaller purchase can have a much larger impact. So take that counter snipe IPS that was only $500. In and of itself, if we evaluate that tool within the IPS silo, it's probably pretty worthless, right? But if we take that tool and we now add our already existing firewall functionality and our already existing malware functionality and our antivirus and our vulnerability management, and we start feeding that data into that one IPS system, it now becomes infinitely more valuable for our enterprise, right? So if we can share that data amongst them, it's much, much more valuable. Now, Symbiotic Security is not a piece of hardware or software that you can purchase. You can't buy Symbiotic Security. It has to be something that our vendors build into the tools, right? It has to be something that, maybe you use a middleman to get that functionality. But the tool has to be able to provide and has to be able to consume. It's not a ranking system for vendors, right? A vendor can't say, we are the most symbiotic tool on the market, right? It's not possible to do that. And it's definitely not a label that you can slap on your product, right? There's no, now with new and improved Symbiotic Security, it doesn't work that way. What it is it's a philosophy. It's how do you evaluate your purchases, right? When you go and you look for tools, when you are buying a new IPS system or anything else for that matter, you look at that tool and you say, well, does this tool have the ability to consume data? Can I take my already existing systems and feed that data into this to make it more valuable? And can this tool provide back to my already existing systems? It's a concept. It's how do you create an ecosystem of security systems? Not just one tool in a silo. How do we make our tools talk to each other? How do we break outside those silos? It's a means of making the tools that we've already invested in more valuable to us, right? You've already spent thousands of dollars on tools in your environment. And just because somebody says you should buy an IPS system doesn't mean you should buy the IPS system and forget about everything else. Make those tools work together. Now I'm going to warn you guys. There's something I like to call pseudo-symbiosis. And the idea here is that a lot of these vendors out there, they like to say that they have different tools. And they like to say all these tools work together. So I'll just name it. McAfee, they were on that list. McAfee is a very large vendor. They have a very large tool set. It's very, very diverse. And most of those tools will work together, right? Now, the problem is those tools don't work very well with other vendors. If you don't have McAfee products and you start looking at a McAfee IPS system, it might be far less useful than somebody who already has a McAfee EPO system or something like that, right? It gives symbiotic functionality, but only within that vendor's tool set, right? So you have to buy McAfee, buy McAfee, buy McAfee. McAfee wins in that, but you get stuck in the proprietary protocols, right? True symbiotic security is about being able to handpick your tool set. You should be able to get the best of breed tools, the stuff that's already in your environment, buy the best stuff that's out there, and have it all work together nicely. All right, so let's talk about tools and classifications. Now, right now, our data is sitting in these silos, right? You have reputation data, data about do I trust the source. By the way, if anybody wants a copy of this presentation, gladly give it out, and they're recording everything as well, so don't need to take notes or whatever. We have attack data, information about how I'm being attacked. You have information about what attacks are my systems vulnerable to. You have information about what versions of OS and software you have on your systems. You have information about who's using your system. You have information about who should have access to what. You have information about trust hierarchies. You have information about authentication, authorization, what's been tested via QA, trust boundaries is data crossing between two trust levels. You have all this data already. It's just existing within each silo of every single security tool that you have in your environment. Now, what happens if we break that data out and we say that these different systems can work together? We can answer some very important questions, questions that are detrimental to our security. Questions like, should I accept packets from some random IP address? How do we find the answer? We look at the reputation data, we look at the attack data, we look at the vulnerability data, the asset data, and the trust boundaries. If we have that information, and we're able to get that information from all of our different systems, work it together, we have the right answer to that question. Questions like, should I allow a random person X to download file Y? Take data classification, reputation, authentication, authorization, and trust boundaries. Now you have the answer to that question, right? We break the data out of those silos. Even more magic. So with symbiotic security, the possibilities are limited only by the security ecosystem that you've put in place. So you can create WAF rules based on attack data, right? I get all this information about what's attacking me, I take that, I filter it back out, say here's all the attacks, let's block those, right? You can get information about if a targeted exploit is actually going to affect the system, right? You look at, is the system vulnerable? Here's the attack, mesh that data together, now I know. Should I allow a system on my network, right? All these questions. So I say demand symbiotic security, right? This is my little pulpit up here. Demand symbiotic security. Let the vendors know up front that you're evaluating the tool based on the effectiveness that you'll be evaluating the effectiveness of their tool based on these things. the other tools in your environment that you already have, the stuff you've already paid for, that the tool can consume data from, the other tools in your environment that it can provide data to, and the net increase in security for your entire tool ecosystem, not just their tool silo. So, having said that, I asked Dan to come and help me with this talk. And the reason why is I've been using a tool for a little bit at NI called ThreadFix. And I thought ThreadFix kind of embodied what I'm talking about, what Symbiotic security is. In that it can basically pull from different sources, it can provide two different sources, and it's basically a mediator to allow these different things to communicate. So I'm going to hand this over to Dan to kind of show you what ThreadFix is about.
Thank you. Apparently in day 4 of conference, I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, and so, oops, move this down. There we go. Good. Okay. And so, yeah, in talking with Josh about some of the things that we've done with ThreadFix, I think it fits real well with what he's talking about in this idea of symbiotic tools working together. And so what ThreadFix is it's a tool geared toward folks that are running software security programs, and it lets them consolidate a number of different activities that they're undertaking, and to track those things and help folks run vulnerabilities through the vulnerability management process, from the identification through tracking them, transferring them to developers, communicating them to security operations, and hopefully ultimately fixing the problems. One of the things that we observed, and one of the big drivers for us to create ThreadFix, is we found that a lot of people are finding vulnerabilities in the software security space. Like anybody, pen testers, which pen testers out there have problems finding vulnerabilities in web apps that they look at? No one, at least no one willing to admit it. What we do find is a lot of organizations have challenges fixing the vulnerabilities that they identify. And so ThreadFix is geared in a vendor-neutral way to help folks manage this process and run these vulnerabilities through to actual resolution. Freely available. You can download it off of Google Code. We ship it as a zip, like WebGoat, where you can unpack it and run it, or also as a pre-configured Linux VM appliance image. But again, totally free, open source, and available. And what we found when we were out working with different organizations is that we found that most places have challenges in that it's a multi-vendor environment. They're using different dynamic analysis tools to find vulnerabilities. They're using different static analysis tools. They're using manual threat modeling, penetration testing, code reviews, and stuff like that. And what we found was the existing vendor solutions, as Josh mentioned, are kind of silo integrated, where everything from the vendor kind of works together, but things didn't work together across vendors. And that presents challenges for organizations where they have multiple vendors that they're dealing with. And so what ThreadFix lets you do is, first of all, pull in the results from these different static and dynamic testing tools, as well as manual penetration testing, threat modeling, and stuff like that, and have them all in a single view. And so if you have, if you're running, and again, these examples are not meant to endorse anybody, but if your security group is running AppScan and you're running around and doing scanning, but your IT audit group is using Qualys or something like that, what it does is it pulls this data in and normalizes it and gives you a single list of the vulnerabilities, so that you can track those. And so you're not going to, a bad interaction that we see in a lot of cases is you run a scan, you get like a 400-page PDF report with a color graph on the front page. And you go to the development team and you're like, here you go, developers. And I put sticky notes on the stuff that I think is particularly important. And the developer says, like, it gives you the one finger salute of like, hey, buddy, get out of here. You know what? The only thing worse than that is going to the developers and being like, hey, I've got 2 PDF reports, right? And there's probably some data shared in between these things, but I'm not sure what they are. Good luck. And that gives the developers like every excuse in the world to push back and say, like, hey, you were like actively wasting my time, right? Like you've gone above and beyond your job requirements, and now you're actively wasting my time. Stop. Quit doing that. And so the result is like giant Excel spreadsheets get created. And whatnot. So the first thing ThreadFix lets you do is in a vendor-independent way, or pan-vendor way, to pull all this stuff in, normalize the data, and look at it. Once you start dealing with this data as in a structured data format as opposed to in big PDF blobs, you can start to do some really cool stuff from a transform standpoint. For example, you can say, if I know I have a SQL injection vulnerability at this particular point on this application's attack surface, I can write a very specific IDS IPS signature that's going to look for potential attacks against this known vulnerable point. Or I can feed that data to my web application firewall and get a better investment, or better value out of the investment I've made in this web application firewall. Because, again, if you know that you've got a SQL injection vulnerability and you see a SQL injection attack signature, which may or may not be malicious, in the best case, you're going to send an error page back to that user because the database routine is going to throw an error anyway. In the worst case, this is an active attack, and so why not be very aggressive about protecting against attacks on points of your organization's attack surface where you know you're vulnerable. Also, what you can do, is or something we found to be a much more positive interaction, as opposed to interacting with developers by sending them PDF files. Take the vulnerability data, package it in a way that makes sense to the software developers, and send it to their software defect tracking system. It's crazy to talk to developers and say, hey, 90% of your job, you're managing your workload out of Jira or Bugzilla or ClearCase or whatever your organization's tracking system is. But for this 10% of your job that is very security specific, you need to work off of PDFs or log into this management console that's separate from the thing you're already using. That sets up, again, these very negative interactions where you go to developers, you're like, hey, in addition to all the other stuff you're doing, here's a 400-page PDF with sticky notes on it. And so another thing you can do in ThreadFix is package, slice and dice this vulnerability data and ship it over to these, ship it over to the developers so that they can access it in the systems that they're already using. Much more positive interaction than emailing PDFs, which is a very ignorable means of communication. And so again, in talking with Josh about his desire for symbiotic stuff, that's one of the things that we're doing here. In that ThreadFix, we can talk and consume data from most of the popular commercial and open source tools, both on the static analysis side and the dynamic analysis side. And we can consume these different technologies. We normalize it to an internal data format, and then you can manipulate it. One of the things from a philosophy standpoint is we've tried to make the use cases that everybody is going to use, put those in the user interface, but we also expose a RESTful API, and we've got a command line client for folks who want to script these types of interactions. And so that's cool because what it sets up is the ability to, again, to slice and dice this data, to connect between different tools. And we'll run through a couple of specific integration scenarios, but I think today it's less that we're trying to advocate these specific interactions, but more that we're trying to interact or to advocate the philosophy of, I've made an investment in these variety of different tools, let's make these things work together in a way that's going to deal with our organization's specific use cases. We also, in communicating out to these web application firewalls, IDS systems, we can pull data from the logs back in and map that back to the vulnerabilities that were caused for the creation of these virtual patches. And so all of a sudden, the software security team starts to see things that are, starts to see this operational data that they might not have access to before. And so this lets you do prioritization, because you're communicating between these different teams. The software security analysts don't have to make decisions in a vacuum. They can start making decisions based on actual attack information. And that's something that we see in a lot of software security groups. We see a big divide between folks between the folks that are doing the software security stuff and the actual attack data that exists out there. And so, all SQL injection vulnerabilities are not created equal. All cross-site scripting vulnerabilities are not created equal. By having access to this operational data, this starts to put the software security folks in a position to better risk rank and slice and dice this information. So Josh talks about the philosophy of symbiosis. What the next layer down is to look at these different silos or these different classes of tools, and to start to look at what sorts of data does each one produce, what sort of data does each one consume. And so in this kind of limited example, what we'll look at is we've got dynamic scanners that are producing web application vulnerabilities. We have static scanners that are producing knowledge about web application or software application vulnerabilities. You've got manual threat modeling and penetration testing activities that are producing knowledge of potential vulnerabilities in your software. You can pull all of that data in to ThreadFix, and then from ThreadFix we can start to send out
virtual patch rules for these intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, web application firewall systems. If I know where vulnerabilities are, I can tell these sensor devices about where the vulnerabilities are, and hopefully a good sensor device is going to be able to say, oh, you've got a vulnerability there? Cool, I'm going to be very aggressive in protecting against attacks that look like that class of vulnerability at this particular point on your attack surface. And also from these IDS IPS systems, we can start to feed alert logs back so that we can see like, hey, now we've got actual operational data that says, of the 100 cross-site scripting vulnerabilities you found, these are the 10 that somebody really seems to be excited about, right? These are the signatures that are really getting, that are really being exercised. I had a great conversation with Ryan Barnett from Mod Security, who I don't know if he's in here, but talking about like some of the stuff that they do in Mod Security can also be a source of vulnerability data. They can passively watch the traffic going across this web application firewall and identify like, hey, here is vulnerability data as well. And so the IDS, IPS, or WAF system can also feed data about web application vulnerabilities out. And as I talked about, ThreadFix knows a lot about vulnerabilities, but if you're treating this data in a structured fashion, you can start to slice and dice it, package that up not as vulnerability data, but instead you can package it up as software defect data, send it to the software development teams in a format that they can consume, and then learn about what the software development folks when they think that they've fixed vulnerabilities, so that you can schedule rescans and things like that. And so again, like by understanding the kind of the different silos or the different product classes that you have in your organization, if you can start to think about how could these things interact to make your investment in one create additional value from your investment in another. It was a funny conversation I had leading up to the ThreadFix release. We did a lot of briefings with press and analysts, and one of the analysts we talked to, are there any analysts in the crowd? Actually, don't tell me. I don't want to know. So I'll just say what I'm going to say. But the analyst said, but PCI says you either need to have a vulnerability scanner or a web application firewall. Why would an organization have both? All right. That was a long day. And I had to patiently explain, well, number one, PCI is not specifically about security. We're talking about the real world of organization actually trying to manage risk. But that was an interesting view from this analyst where they again, the question was like, why would you, if you only had to do one of these things, why would you do more than one? Like the reality is that most organizations have more than one of these technologies deployed, and to really maximize the value of the investment that you've made, you need to be able to start to to promote these interactions, because what you know about vulnerabilities in your organization, it's crazy not to use that to inform the scanning or the sensing and blocking technologies that you have in your organization. It's crazy to say like, I know we've got all these problems. I hope that this thing that I haven't told about the problems is actually being successful in in detecting and blocking these types of attacks. And so what we'll look at is one specific interaction. Again, it's less that I'm advocating this specific interaction. We gave this talk at B-Sides Las Vegas, and someone in the audience got like very worked up about this interaction. That would never work, and I would never know. Like I want to auto block this stuff. And so it's less that I think we're advocating this specific interaction, and more promoting the philosophy of we want to be able to have these types of interactions. And so what we're going to look at is using a dynamic scanner, or more than one dynamic scanner, pulling in vulnerability data and normalizing that and deduplicating it, so you've got one specific list of the vulnerabilities that you've identified through these different scanning activities. Using that to promote virtual patch rules out to your IDS, IPS, or WAF system, and then pulling alert logs back so that you can let the software security analyst know of all the virtual patches that you generated. Here are the ones that are actually being fired in production. I had to. Josh's original slide said, vendors. This presentation exists because vendors suck. I take a softer stance. I just want vendors to suck just a little bit less. That's what we're asking. Is like the reason that we created this is because when we go out and work with organizations that are deploying their software security programs, the I won't name specific names in this case, but vendors tend to promote a philosophy of like, oh, you want this, you want that, you want whatever. Much as Josh mentioned, like we have the total stack of all these things. the reality is that in most organizations we don't see folks that have said like, oh, we've like I opened a vein and made a giant checkout to XYZ giant software company, and they're responsible for like all of our enterprise security. What we see instead is organizations are dealing with multiple multiple vendors, like all these different sources of data. And the vendor solutions, typically do a good job of integrating in their silo. They don't do a great job of consuming the results that come from other, from other tools outside of their stack. And that's unfortunate because the reality in most organizations is that you have to deal with results from multiple tools. And so again, a lot of proprietary protocols, like of APIs, like of standards, and like our message is like, please guys, just like play nice. I know. Especially in a discipline that is new and kind of emerging as application or software security, it's obviously evolving and everybody's trying to get their lock on the market. But like that approach, we feel is a very like customer hostile approach. To say like, oh well, the way that we promote software security is that you use all of our stuff and only our stuff. That would be great if only a world existed where that where you could enforce that on your customers. As a big vendor, the reality that we found is that you can't, and folks trying to adhere to this approach, vendors trying to adhere to this approach. Again, we feel that that's like ultimately kind of a customer hostile approach, because the reality is folks are going to buy different tools, or they're going to do acquisitions and roll up teams that have different systems in place, and it's better to deal with that reality and find a way to provide value to customers as opposed to try and hold on to some sort of approach that doesn't it's not going to work. What makes this all easier? If you had like common data standards from scanning tools, event logs, and so on. And in the software security space, we're seeing some of this stuff. The MITRE guys have the software assurance findings and expression schema, or SAFEs, which basically they went to like the top 20 vendors in the app or software security space and like OR'd all of their data formats together. That's like a 300-page UML diagram, which I applaud their. Again, it's not that a lot of work didn't go into this. The challenge is that like when my browser can't open the standards document, I question how useful that standard is. I think they're trying to like sort out some funding things, and so we may see some stuff moving forward with that. But again, like the challenge that we had looking at it is it wasn't really useful, for us in interacting with customers. There is also the OWASP data exchange format. Simon Bennett, the main ZAP maintainer, he's looking at this challenge as well. And I think he's working with Michael Coates now at Mozilla, and they just like beat him constantly, make him work. So I don't know if he's had a chance to kind of push this down the field as much. So one of the things that we did through our experience in putting together ThreatFix is we created the simple software vulnerability language, or SSVL. And this is based on our experience in interacting with these different tools and importing data from AppScan, Web Inspector, Arachnai, pulling data from the Veracode, White Hat, Qualys, all these folks. We've figured out like here are the fields that we think are absolutely important. These are the critical fields that we need to do these types of transforms that we found to be very, very useful to virtual patching, communicating these things to defect trackers and whatnot. Here's the stuff that we think is absolutely essential to be able to communicate. And so it's very simple. It's very kind of stripped down. And for people with incredible eyesight, that's what it looks like. If you, again, this presentation's online, or if you want to contact Josh or I, we'll get you a copy. If you're interested in taking a look at this, it's a Google Doc, and just email me what Google account you want. I'll make you an editor so that you can go in and make comments or contributions. But the advantage that I think we have versus other efforts is, we've done this from the bottom up, saying I've created importers that can consume data from all these tools, and here's the stuff that I actually import. When I write an importer, this is the stuff that I actually pay attention to. And so it's been battle tested based on our interaction with all of these, the static and dynamic scanner folks, versus the other stuff, the safes or something, which is from the top down, and let's look at what everybody's doing and make a giant, like a comprehensive look at what everybody's, what everybody's doing. We also think this is something that this is valuable to vendors to be able to promote their interaction with different folks, because that, like, at the end of the day, this is something that folks, your customers want to do, and again, to deny them that ability is something that is a customer hostile.
Do you have anybody actually producing this SSVL reports
Great question. Yeah. So the question is, do we actually have any vendors that are generating this SSVL? We don't right now. We don't even produce SSVL. That was one of the goals. The 1.0 release was September 17th, and in the push to get things finished for the release, we don't have yet have an exporter. That's something that we'll have pretty soon, just because the SSVL XML schema is a pretty direct reflection of the database schema that we have. So I'm sure that there's like an open source Java, Pojo thing that will just like crap XML out that looks like this stuff. But it is something where we have an opportunity to interact with a lot of vendors, and we've seen the kind of attitudes of a lot of vendors start to evolve and be more receptive, not necessarily specifically to SSVL. Right. And again, like I don't need to have my name on this. I just want something. We'll donate it to whatever or call it whatever or whatever. But the advantage that we've got is it reflects like actual integration with all of these different tools that you can see out there.
I'm going to go back here real quick. I was actually talking with one of the vendors who does it's a host-based malware solution. And I was talking with him the other day, and he was saying, this is great and whatever. And I was telling him that we already have a network-based malware solution. And he's like, oh, but my thing does this and whatever. And I started thinking about this whole thing. And I was like, well, even though both of these vendors are in the malware space, there's no reason why these two tools couldn't actually work together. If the host-based solution had information, or if the network-based one had information about an attack, they could provide that data to each other. The host-based one could say, hey, I noticed that somebody's hitting me, please stop it at the network level, right? And the network one could say, hey, I noticed that you have some malware, go remove it from that host. So even within the same space, I think vendors could provide this level of functionality, and they could leverage it together. So there's some very interesting stuff there too, where vendors playing nice, doing these kind of open things. I think everybody can win from that. So this is an idea that I came up with when I was working through all this stuff, but I don't want this to be my idea. The reason why I spoke about this at B-Sides Las Vegas, the reason why I'm speaking about it here, is because I want you guys to embrace this. I hope at the end of this presentation you guys all see value in this. And what I'd like to do is I'd like you all to take it back to your companies. When you're talking with vendors, I want you to think in terms of Symbiotic security, not just in terms of features or price or things like that, and use this in your day-to-day interactions. Some other ideas that we've had is, what if we go to Gartner and we start talking about the Magic Quadrant and we say, what if we add Symbiotic's characteristics to their evaluation criteria and say, hey, when you're writing this report on this company, can they consume data? And what data can they consume? Can they provide data, and what data can they provide, right? What if we go and we create a wiki site where everybody can post a list of tools they're using and in what ways they're symbiotic? This should be a community effort. This should be something that we all work together to kind of figure these things out. And I think the more community effort it is, the more this grows, and vendors are almost forced into being symbiotic, which benefits all of us. So with that, help us help the community. SymbioticSecurity.com is out there. We have those email addresses. Please feel free to email us. If you want to go and take the presentation back to work and tell your coworkers about Symbiotic Security, by all means. This is not meant to be a Dan and Josh thing. This is a community effort. It should be community driven. The nice thing here is that there's a lot of supply and demand, right? And so if you go to a vendor and say, look, I'm only going to select you as a vendor because you provide this functionality. Because I already own a tipping point IPS, and I have McAfee EPO, and I have semantic antivirus or whatever. I have these systems. I want these systems to be able to talk with your tool. You have to provide me this functionality because that other vendor over there, they do provide me that functionality. And if every single one of these things that I have can talk to that tool but it can't talk to yours, they win, right? That's what you need to do. That's what you need to tell those vendors. That I think a lot of vendors, they're kind of closed-minded. They don't think that way. And that's why you kind of have to think in terms of who does provide this functionality and how do I encourage the ones that are thinking that way, right? And if they're not thinking that way, sit down with them, even if they lose the bid or whatever, sit down with them and say, you're not thinking this way, this is the reason why you lost. To your second point, in terms of OWASP doing this, I think OWASP is working in that general direction. Dan talked a little bit about one of the standards that OWASP is working for. Dan and them, they're working on their language format, and that will, I believe it'll be open source, right? I mean, the whole thread fix is basically an open source tool designed, it's specifically in the application security space, which is kind of where OWASP kind of functions. But there's no reason why a thread fix like tool couldn't exist in the network protocol space or things like that. I just know that their kind of core expertise is around the application security, and that's kind of why they've gone that way. Didi? Oh, sorry.
And one thing I will say is it's been interesting interacting with the different vendors as we've done the kind of development and rollout of ThreadFix, and we've seen a lot of kind of a range of responses. No one has been openly hostile to it, which is good. But what we have seen is a range of responses from like, oh, you're doing that, that's whatever, that's fine, to folks that are have actually gone in and made changes. Especially in the open source space, like the Breakman folks. I don't know if they're here, but like they made like overnight changes to their file format. We said, hey, we need like these 2 or 3 pieces of data, and like the next day they're like, the commit number or whatever has all that stuff in there. I'm like, damn, thanks. But we've also seen that from some of the commercial vendors where they've added data fields to their API responses and said, oh, okay, you need this this parameter in this way or whatever. Okay, good. Starting on this date, that data is going to start to be available. Really cool. And we've seen vendors say like, hey, you brought your stuff in and you're not catching these like 10 classes of vulnerabilities. You've got good coverage over here, but you don't have this stuff. And so just in our interactions, we've started to see some positive responses, which is really cool. And for those of you who actually, I don't provide, to some of the vendors we do provide money just because we're licensees of the tools and whatnot, but those of you who are on the purchasing side of enterprises, if you guys start demanding this stuff, we'll see even more aggressive, I think, adherence or enthusiasm for creating these types of interactions. And so, we've done what we could, and again, thanks to all the vendors that have been supportive of the stuff that we're doing. If you want, once you start putting some real purchase dollars behind it, I think we're going to see a lot more motivation to change the ways from the vendors that are out there.
You touched on something that was really interesting too, which was the fact that ThreadFix can basically consume from multiple vendors, and you can actually use that as a comparison tool. So you can say, hey, I'm going to try out the white hat and the barcode and the blah, blah, blah. You suck it all into ThreadFix, and then you look at where the duplication is, where one is catching vulnerabilities over the other, right? So you can start to use this kind of technology just to see who's doing a better job at that stuff. So yeah.
And one point I'm going to call is it Shay Chen? I don't think I've met you in person, but we've interacted via email a little bit. I don't know if anybody has looked at his comparison report for different scanner things, benchmarking. Definitely check it out. He can tell you about it, or I'll send you a link to it. You spend a tremendous amount of time, or what appears to be a tremendous amount of time, which is really cool stuff. But again, like with a tool like ThreadFix, if you're doing bake-offs inside of your organization, you can start to say, we're going to run scans of the same application. We're going to flag all the false positives, and then we can run a report where we see of X number of vulnerabilities that were found. This tool found some percentage, but their false positive rate was higher. Maybe we want to look at these other folks instead, because I would rather have. Again, what are your goals? Do you want deeper insight and you're willing to deal with false positives, or do you need fewer false positives because you've got a whole lot of things you need to run through the scanner? Using this, once you've got data in a format where you can start to slice and dice it like that, it makes it much easier to ask those sorts of questions.
So, I think we're out of time, but please, if you have questions, whatever, feel free to talk to us afterwards. Thank you.